All right, Mr. Chair, you're able to commence if you'd like.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Administrative Policies. Mr. Clerk, do we have quorum?
Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Okay, great. So we will go to the published agenda. Keep in mind there is an addendum. The first thing is a public meeting for the tax write-offs pursuant to section 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act. Normally there is there not something like an announcement I'm meant to read for that, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Chair, the information regarding the public meeting is listed at the very top of the agenda.
Just under item 1?
Paragraph there. Before where it says meeting to order, but I can read it. Yeah, you,
no, that's what I'm looking at. That's all it is.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay. Yes, item 1, yes.
Okay, so item 1 is a public meeting for that, for one of the items on the agenda. It is tax write-offs pursuant to sections 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act. So that is what we're doing right now. So members of the public are permitted to speak and have their comments recorded. Would anyone from the public wish to speak?
And Mr. Chair, I will just quickly remind members of the public that if they wish to speak during the meeting tonight, they are to use the raise hand function within Zoom. To do so, there's the participants icon in the lower left-hand portion of the menu. Once you click on that, that loads a screen on the right-hand portion of the screen. And then at the bottom, there's raise hand function. But I do not see anyone who's interested in participating in this portion of the meeting, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, James. So that's right. So if you have clicked on where it says participants at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you get a side screen on the right with all of the members of the public who are present. There's a list of participants. The members of the committee, of course, are on screen. Members of the public all are listed, the ones that are now logged in. There are a number of members of the public present. I'll ask again, does anyone wish to speak to the item tax write-offs pursuant to sections 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act? If you do wish to speak, you click the little button at the very bottom right, which says raise hand. If you have trouble finding that, you can always unmute and say something, and we will hear you. Okay, seeing none, there are no public comments for this item for the public meeting. So we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. The next item is just calling the regular meeting to order. So the first thing we have to do is approve the agenda. There is an addendum. Have the committee members had a chance to see the addendum? Mr. Clerk, do we need a separate motion for the addendum, or is it approve the agenda with the addendum?
No, you can just do it as one motion.
Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as printed with the addendum. Yes, moved by Councillor Holland. Councillor Holland wishes to speak. Go ahead.
So the addendum that I'm looking at is the one that has 3 new business items plus correspondence. Is that it?
The addendum has under business the consent of the administrative policy.
Oh, to withdraw. Okay, sorry, I missed the word withdraw, and I thought that there were 3 business items. Thank you.
So if we approve the agenda, just so we're clear on procedure, if we approve the agenda with the addendum, we're approving 2 items of correspondence and the withdrawal of 3 items from the agenda. And if that happens, any delegations related to those withdrawn items would be out of order. just so that's clear. That's just following the procedural bylaw. So I'm happy to have the clerk answer any questions about this step, because if we approve the agenda with the addendum, 3 items disappear from the agenda, as do all delegations related to those items. It is, just so the committee members know, it is the intention, I've heard from staff, it's the intention to bring these items back in the very near future. And we will discuss that when the timing of that at the end of this meeting. Is that clear? So just wait for Councillor McLaren to come back on screen. Do we have a seconder, Mr. Clerk? Oh, sorry. We don't need to move around.
Sorry, I felt that. I thought Councillor Holland and Councillor.
Seconded by Councillor Kiley to approve the agenda with the addendum. We'll wait for Councillor McLaren. While we're waiting, I'll just mention what happens with quorum. We need 4 members out of the 6 minimum to maintain quorum. So thank you for the 3 of you for your attendance. So we have quorum with all 4 of us here. There are 2 members absent. If half of us were absent, we would not have quorum and we would not be able to proceed. But we do have quorum. So Councillor McLaren, if you have been listening, it's been moved by Councillor Holland and seconded by Councillor Kiley that we approve the agenda with the addendum. The addendum includes the withdrawal of 3 business items and 2 items of correspondence. Is everybody ready to vote on the approval of the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. The addendum is now in action, so items F, G, and H drop off the agenda. Go back to the agenda. So we have, that's all under business 8. So we have under business, we have A, B, C, D, E. And that's it. And then just the regular items. So A, B, C, D, E. But back to the agenda. So that was the approval agenda. Now we need to confirm the minutes from past meetings. There were 2 previous meetings that had minutes. Yes.
Mr. Chair, can I just mention to the 3 delegations that were listed on the agenda, your delegations will carry over to when this matter comes before the committee at a future meeting. So I'll send you an email once that's determined.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So confirmation of minutes. So we have minutes from August 6th and minutes from September 9th. Mr. Clerk, do we need 2 separate motions or can we deal with it with 1 motion?
1 motion would be sufficient, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So minutes from our regular meeting on August 6th and our meeting on September 9th. We need a mover and a seconder for these minutes. Moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Holland. They're now on the floor. Are there any errors or omissions or comments about the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the minutes to approve both sets of minutes, August 6th and September 9th. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Thank you very much. We're now on disclosure of pecuniary interest. This would be related to the 5 business items on the agenda. Seeing none, we go to delegations. The first delegation was related to item F, which was withdrawn. The second delegation was related to item F, which was withdrawn. And the third delegation was also related to item F. So, Mr. Clerk, are there any other delegations other than the 3 originally printed?
No, they're not, Mr. Chair.
Therefore, there's no delegations today. And those 3 delegates will receive information of when that item reappears on our agenda. It will be coming back at a future meeting. Next is briefings from staff. Are there any briefings, Mr. Clerk?
I know there are no briefings, Mr. Chair.
So we're on to business. First item of business is the Rideau Crest Home Board of Management. We need a mover and a seconder to resolve into the Board of Management. Moved by Councillor Holland, second by Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. We are now the Board of Management for Rideau Crest Home. There is an information report, and normally that is introduced by the administrator, and I will cede the floor to her if she's here.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening.
This is Ms. Keys, Administrator of Rideau Crest Home. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. So this is the third report that is provided to the Rideau Crest Board of Management for 2020. This report contains information from July through to the end of August. Rideau Crest had 7 incidents reportable to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and no complaints over this time period. As noted in the last report, the Ministry of Health was in the home on June 23rd, 24th, and 26th. During the course of the inspection, the compliance officers reviewed 3 critical incidents reported by the home, as well as 2 complaints reported by a resident. At the time of our last Board of Management meeting, the home had not received its final inspection report. The report was received on August 7th, and as a result, the home was issued 2 written notifications, to which there was 1 voluntary plan of correction and 1 compliance order. The home has created and implemented a comprehensive action plan to address all areas of non-compliance. There is no requirement by the ministry to inspect or review the compliance order. There were no findings from the resident complaint. As of August, there were 463 people on the waiting list for the home. 262 of those are actively seeking and or requiring admission to long-term care, of which 61 are currently in crisis. There were no outbreaks in the home during this time period. The home has started to prepare for the resumption of capital projects. In conjunction with Facilities Management and Construction Services, the RFP for the replacement of flooring on all resident terraces has been awarded, and construction is in the process of being prepared and planned to start later on this month. The home will be working closely with both the contractor and city staff to ensure all aspects of infection control practices are in place and being followed for the duration of this project. The home has slowly resumed visitation as directives have allowed by the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province. We are currently allowing both essential visitation and general visitation at this time. Management continues to work closely with all staff and families to ensure all plans and preparations are in place in the event of an outbreak being declared. COVID-19 remains a very serious threat to the community and to long-term care homes, as we seem to be very much embedded in the second wave at this time. With a number of long-term care homes across the province back in COVID-19 outbreak, we remain diligent in purchasing and maintaining a healthy stock of personal protective equipment to ensure the health and safety of both our staff and our residents. As of the end of August, the home had received $167,000 in emergency COVID-19 provincial funding. This funding supports the cost of supplies, screening, and other incremental pandemic expenses. As of the end of August, the home had spent $239,000 in pandemic expense, exceeding the budget by $72,000. This funding is subject to reconciliation against qualified expenses at year end. The home did, however, receive further funding in September and October, which brings our total funding amount to $305,000 to date, to which we have spent approximately $400,000. As of the end of August, Rideau Crest Home had spent 65% of its municipal financial contribution to our operating budget, which is $74,000 under budget. This does not factor in employee lieu banks or stat holidays remaining for the remainder of this year. This projection does, however, factor in all pandemic costing. The home is currently looking at a projection of approximately $100,000 overspent at year end. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. First, Councillor Holland, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions related to staffing costs. Under financials, I found this interesting. I'll give you my interpretation, and you can let me know if it's right or not. So there was underspending on wages, or typically the summer months have higher wage costs due to vacation coverage, etc. Was that underspent, that amount underspent more because people were not taking as much holidays this year?
It was underspent primarily due to lack of vacations. There was a lot of people who canceled vacations, just weren't simply able to utilize the vacation they normally would this time of year. However, some of those underspends aren't factoring in a lot of the pandemic costing. So that's why we are seeing a bit of an underspend there.
Okay, and okay, and so then just in terms of like, let's say future costs with staffing, if I'm trying to get a sense of whether like with, let's say worst case scenario, an outbreak in a long-term care facility, with staff having to take time away from work, let's say if they were exposed or someone in the family was, that type of thing, what are we looking at for like capacity? Is there like in terms of the number of staff and the budget available? You don't need to give me actual specific dollar amounts. I'm just curious about the overall situation. I'm sure you've been planning for it.
Yeah, it is a real fear that staffing is an issue in the event that we do need to declare an outbreak. We are seeing some of those challenges now as there is a number of respiratory illness in the community, not necessarily related to COVID, but we're seeing children back in schools and colds and that sort of thing is very widespread in the community. So as soon as staff are falling down with those symptoms, they of course don't pass our screening, are not allowed in the home, have to stay away from the home for a number of days while they're getting tested, and we're awaiting a negative result as well as no symptoms. So we are struggling in that aspect by backfilling with our part-time staff. We're seeing a high cost in overtime at this time. We're seeing a lot of shifts where we're running not at full capacity. So in the event we do need to go into an outbreak, we do know that we are going to see a number of staff automatically being removed from the home because they're going to have contact tracing. So that is a real fear. We do have plans in place to cross-train throughout many of our staff. As an example, dietary and housekeeping will help with feeding. So they're taking courses with their dietitian to ensure that they can help in that capacity. So we're looking at a number of areas that we can prepare for in the event that we do see further reductions in staff due to sickness.
Wow. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Kylie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Reading the report, we heard about two different types of visitors that can come now to Rideau Crest, essential visitors and general visitors. And the first don't have to have physical distancing requirements, but they have to wear masks. And then the second do need to have physical distancing in addition to masks. So Ms. Keys, could you help us understand the difference between the two, who's essential and who's a general visitor?
Absolutely. This has changed over the course of the pandemic a number of times. What we're seeing with essential visitors at this point is caregivers are falling under that title. Caregivers are meant to be able to come into the home, assist their loved one, assist the staff in caring for their loved one. So they're coming in, they're helping with, in many cases, bathing, feeding, dressing, grooming. So they are not required to follow the physical distancing requirement when they are deemed caregivers. General visitors, we do want to maintain that social distance as much as possible. General visitors are friends who may be coming to visit a resident. They are being tested and doing screening before coming into the home, but we are asking that they maintain that social distance when they are in the home and with the resident. So it's just the caregivers that aren't required to do that because they are, in many cases, providing hands-on care to that resident.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's helpful. My second and final question is about the provincial funding that's been allocated for COVID. I believe that it runs until October, if I read the report correctly, and I'm wondering what happens after that, because presumably you'll need additional funds. Will it just be another provincial funding announcement at that time?
Yes, we have generally been seeing funding announcements come in 2-month increments. So we're finding out in August that we're getting money for September and October lump sum payments that are coming to the home. There has been a number of initiatives that the province has put forward in terms of money that they've allocated towards long-term care for certain initiatives, and obviously COVID cost is one of those. So we do anticipate we will see further payments come through because we still are required to have screening, high-touch surface cleaning, increased costs in pandemics with masking for all staff and visitors. So we make the assumption further funding will come through, but we have been hearing it primarily on a 2-month basis so far.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question related somewhat to what Councillor Holland was asking about capacity at the home. In the unfortunate possibility that the pandemic lasts, say, another 12 months, are the current practices and precautions and stocks of PPE and so on, staff capacity and so on, are we seeing a trend towards being in where residents might be at risk for lower levels of care if this carries on for another 12 months? Or do we have measures in place to deal with that eventuality?
So in regards to personal protective equipment, we have been continuing to order that stock, and we are keeping a very healthy stock in our pandemic room in the event we do need to declare an outbreak. We are also seeing through many of our vendors that stock is running low, again, similar when the pandemic was first declared. So we do continue to maintain that. In terms of staffing, we are continuing with recruitment quite diligently and have been quite successful in doing that. So we are trying to maintain to ensure that all of our vacancies are getting filled in a timely manner so that we don't fall into a scenario where we're also having staff that are sick as well as a number of vacancies in place. So we're hopeful that that trend will continue and we'll stay on top of that.
So from a human resources standpoint, there is general capacity amongst with applicants that you're seeing for vacancies, that there continue to be sufficient applicants, qualified and so on, to be able to fill any vacancies should some nurses or staff be off for periods of time?
At this time, yes, we are seeing that the capacity is there.
You can tell we're all very worried as this pandemic goes on, of the realities of dealing with an extended period of stress. I know at my other employment, we are under extra stress and it is starting to show. So hopefully request things can be dealt with. I would say from your report that it seems like we're okay right now, and we're hoping that we can continue to manage, and that is reassuring that you think that we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
So any other councillors have any questions about the information report? Okay, so then I guess, Mr. Clerk, we go to members of the public for questions.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
So I'm inviting any members of the public present if they have any questions about the information report on Rideau Crest.
Mr. Chair, I do not believe any members of the public wish to comment on this matter.
One has clicked raised hand and no one has unmuted. So we are okay. So there are no questions. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Keys, and good luck in the coming months.
Thank you.
So we go to a motion to, where are we here? Get the exact wording. So that the Administrative Policies Committee rise from the Board of Management of Rideau Crest. Need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Holland. Second by Councillor Kylie. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. We're back to our committee meeting. The next item is item B, tax write-offs pursuant to Municipal Act 2001. There is a report and a recommendation. We'll look to staff member to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr.
Ms.
Chair.
Kennedy, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. With respect to the report before you, report AP 20-025, this is the report that comes 2 or 3 times a year in front of you for council to approve specific tax write-offs. There is a listing of the specific properties attached to the report. Generally, the ones that you'll see on there, and it does list the reasons for the write-offs, are generally for properties that have either been reclassified for certain reasons into different property classes. You'll also see a number that are, there's a write-off for a certain part of the year, if not the whole year, with respect to renovations, or if there's been a fire where the property can't be used for at least 3 months. So you'll see the detail for that. And this is before council with the recommendation to write off approximately just under $150,000 of tax write-offs. This has been allowed for in the 2020 operating budget.
Great. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Are there any questions from members of the committee regarding this report? That's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I do actually have a question. This is only my second time seeing it, as it's an annual thing. I was wondering, how does a property become exempt? That was, I think, letter C in the list of reasons why we can write things off. And the reason I ask is because I looked up the properties in question, and one of them is in my district. And so just for my knowledge of what's happening in the neighborhood, how does a property become exempt?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So a property can be exempt depending on the use of it. So if it's being used for a municipal use, municipalities do not pay property taxes, so it would be exempt under that. As well, if it was being used by the province or the feds, it would show as exempt. They would pay a payment in lieu. I believe there is one on there that's been changed to exempt because the property is being used for a church. And I believe there's another one where the property is being used for school purposes.
Thank you. That makes sense of where it is. I think it would be a provincial hydro station on Wheat Hill. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the committee wish to ask questions about this item? So we go to members of the public. If you wish to ask a question or make a comment, click the raise hand button at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. If you don't see that, you need to click at the bottom center under participants to bring up the participant screen. The raise hand button is at the bottom right of that screen. It's a little white screen that appears on the right of the Zoom screen. Any questions from members of the public? Mr. Clerk, do you see any?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So then we go to the recommendation itself. We need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. It is in your package under item B. So that is that the Administrative Policies Committee recommends as follows: that council approve the cancellation, reduction, or refund of taxes pursuant to applications made under sections 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act 2001, totaling $149,226.44, of which $101,211.54 is the city's portion, and the amount charged back to school boards and downtown Kingston BIA are $46,230.29 for school boards and $1,884.61 for DVIA, respectively, as listed in Exhibit A attached to report AP 20-025. That's the recommendation. You need a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Holland, second by Councillor Martin. It is now on the floor. Are there any comments or questions or actionable items from members of the committee? Seeing none, I'll call a question on this recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. I see we have Councillor Chappelle here. Welcome, Councillor Chappelle. We go to item C. By the way, Councillor Chappelle, before you got here, items F, G, and H were withdrawn at the consent of the committee, the request of staff, and will be appearing at our next meeting, I believe, but that is to be confirmed when we discuss the timing of our next meeting at the end of this agenda, just to bring you up to speed. Anyways, item C is the next item of the agenda, uncollectible tax write-offs pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001. There's a separate report, that's report 20-030. And I guess, Madam Treasurer, you have the floor to introduce this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this report is another one with respect to tax write-offs. These are uncollectible taxes that we are requesting be written off. This is a report that comes annually to the committee, approximately $49,000 that we're requesting be written off. These are amounts that are not collectible. They tend to relate to properties that are small orphan properties that people are not interested in taking on. In this case, there is a schedule that outlines the properties that make up this balance. Primarily, there's a couple of properties on there that we actually did do a tax sale, and the tax sale failed. And there is no interest because of the makeup of the properties for the city to vest those, which means bring those in under our ownership. And so therefore, we just continue to write the taxes off, take them off of the tax roll, and staff work with MPAC just to ensure that for these orphan properties, that they're valued at a minimal value on the tax roll, but they will continue to have a tax calculation, and each year we bring these forward to the committee for write-off.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Are there any questions from members of the committee? I see Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, through your chair. Ms. Kennedy, are there any of those properties that would be suitable for, tiny home development, or is there anything that can be utilized? Or is there any actual benefit to the city reconsidering perhaps taking some of these under our ownership as tax stewards?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, these are very small pieces of property. And actually, I have Jeff Walker, our manager of taxation, at the meeting. So maybe I could just ask him. He can give you a little more information, particularly on the two main properties that make up the balance, and why we're just writing those off and why there's not a value for us to vest them.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The two properties that make up the most substantial parts of the value are failed tax sales. The one that's item number 5 is actually just a 10-foot strip of land that is on a hill that runs between some residential property and a multi-residential property. Neither of the abutting owners are interested in the property, and for the city ourselves, we don't want to own it because it's just a hill with a shrub on it. The item number 6, 0 Augusta Drive, is just a pie-shaped piece of land that's at the corner of Ellesmere and Augusta. We have no interest in it. The way that the property is, it's got a gas regulator on it. If we were to take ownership of it, it would become part of the road allowance there and would have a gas regulator on it. The city doesn't want to own it for that reason. Union Gas has their own easement on it, so they're not interested on it. And Utilities Kingston has the easement already that they need for sanitary, so there's no value to us of having that one either. And then the remaining 4 are either very small strips of land that the abutting owners are not interested in, or they're orphaned in between abutting backyards and neither owner is interested in taking on the property. I should actually say, in order for us to transfer the ownership of it, we would have to tax sale it, invest it, and that's fairly expensive. So we don't want to spend the money to do that just to give the piece of land away to somebody else.
Further to Councillor Chappell's question, in the future, as these items, as these parcels go through tax sales, could you give us an example of, have there been examples of property that the city has acquired through this method and what became of those properties? Just so we know what is possible when these items come before us.
You mean properties that we've purchased otherwise through a failed tax sale? Like
Yes.
that we've listed?
Yes.
So 1100 Montreal would be an example of a property that was a failed tax sale that was purchased by the city and is being remediated to be put into use. We've also had some successful tax sales. 1121 Montreal Drive was purchased by a developer and is being remediated and put back into use, as are all of the Cohen properties that were being remediated and put back into use. And the property that's being used for the care hub was a failed tax sale property at one point.
The former Burton sanitation property then?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so there's a good high profile example of a property that's acquired in that fashion. Thank you. So then logically it follows that the city is on the lookout for opportunities in this fashion, and it just turns out that these particular ones, as you've already explained, are not suitable.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add to that too, just so the committee members are aware. So if we do a tax sale and it fails, Mr. Walker starts a process where we notify various staff across the corporation to see if there is any interest and is it something that could be used for affordable housing or for other interests. So we do have an internal process that starts that and just to see if there is an interest to vest it into the city's name.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councillor Chappell, go ahead.
Yes, through your chair. The property you mentioned where the integrated care hub is, so that's where we're looking at 661 Montreal Street. Is that city property or is that owned by the developer?
That property is owned by a developer, was purchased through the tax sale process that Ms. Kennedy was outlining.
Are there currently any properties that are timing out that will become available through a tax sale that perhaps this committee could be made aware of in advance of them being released for generalized sale?
Yes, we could certainly make you aware of properties that are available and could be coming up. They would first have to fail a tax sale in order for us to be able to vest the property and bring it up. But at the time that it's in that position, we could certainly make you aware.
Mr. Walker, I'm thinking even one step ahead of time. I'm thinking of properties that are being considered for tax sale because they've had the 3-year wait where people have not been paying taxes and it goes up for tax sale. Even at that stage, it'd be helpful for this committee to be aware of potential properties that even before it goes to a failed tax sale, perhaps this committee can bring forward to the rest of council that those properties might be of interest to city council as perhaps, a potential for our own city government to purchase them. I'm just wondering if we could be made aware of it rather than waiting for a tax sale to fail before looking at these marginal properties that really have no value.
Yes, we could certainly make you aware at the time that the properties are being listed for tax sale.
Wonderful, thank you.
If I could just add to that through you, Mr. Chair, no problem. I think there's a way we certainly could do that. I just would want to check with legal. I'm not completely familiar with it's a very legislative process for doing the tax sale. So I'm just not sure in terms of sort of publicly, well, not publicly, but even just to the committee, letting them know that those properties are out there and eligible for tax sale before we've started that process. There is a 1 year, as part of the process, there's actually a 1 year period where we do notify the property owner, and there's certain notification processes that gives them an opportunity to make the payments or to set up an agreement with Mr. Walker where the payments will be made within that year. And then there's certain other sort of legislative time points. So I'm just not exactly sure which point it would be that we could do that, but we certainly can make sure the committee is aware of it at the appropriate time.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my question was more on the premise. I'm not asking for anything that's preconceived in advance. What I'm looking at is if our meeting comes up and there's a timing and there's a tax sale window and it's already been released to the public, it'd be good for our committee to be made aware that these properties are being released for tax sale. So I'm not asking for it to be disclosed in advance of it going public, but I'm just asking for it to be disclosed so that we could have it in the policy administrative report to indicate, because it might be a great indicator of how challenging it is for residents to continue paying their taxes in this city. And it could be a barometer for us to understand what areas of the city are struggling. And that's all I was looking at. I was looking at the bigger macro picture rather than concerned whether, we buy a piece of property with a gas outlet on it.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly arrange to do that.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. We go to members of the public on this item, on the uncollectible taxes. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak? Seeing none, we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Spells, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Let me just get it up here. That the Administrative Policies Committee recommend to Council that Council authorize the City Treasurer to write off uncollectible taxes in the amount of $48,850.74, of which $46,575.37 is the city's portion, and the amount charged back to the school boards and DBIA is $2,267.68 and $769 respectively for the properties listed in Exhibit A to report number AP 20-030. Any discussion? I'll call a question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that carries. Thank you. On to item D, the 2020 External Audit Plan. There is a report again from the Treasurer and a recommendation. So I will turn it back to Ms. Kennedy to introduce this item and report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 2020 external audit is scheduled to start in November, and the auditors have put together their annual plan for how they will be carrying out the audit. As part of that, they are required to come and meet with the Administrative Policies Committee, sitting as a quasi-audit committee under that terms of reference, to review the plan with the committee. And just to go over some of the aspects. The plan is attached to the report, and we do have with us tonight Ms. Huber and Ms. Profit from KPMG. So if okay with you, Mr. Chair, I'll turn that over to them, and they can present their audit plan to the committee.
Sure, go ahead. Mr. Clerk, is there a time limit on this introduction?
No, there's not. Normally the auditor just presents their report in its totality.
Okay, Ms. Prophet and Ms. Huber, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. It's our absolute pleasure to be here tonight to walk you through the highlights of the audit planning report for the 2020 fiscal year. As Ms. Kennedy just mentioned, it has been attached to the report that was pre-circulated. So we will give you a joint presentation tonight between myself and Ms. Prophet, and we do promise to keep it brief to really allow time for any discussion or any questions that might come forth. So jumping into it, with respect to our audit plan, you'll see in our executive summary, there are a number of items really at this stage of the audit. We've had great discussions and communications with the team thus far this year, particularly in light of COVID, and certainly staying on top of that. That will certainly be an extra added response that you'll see in a few slides with respect to our audit plan and scope this year. But before we get there, I have included a slide this year. It's page 3 of our report, and you'll see key responsibilities regarding financial reporting. I think it's always useful to have a conversation with those charged with governance, i.e. this committee, around each of our individual unique responsibilities with respect to the financial reporting process. And this really does align with the new audit reports that were presented in Canada a couple of years back. So the first being with respect to management, it is their financial statements. So they do prepare the financial statements, and they are responsible as well for designing, implementing, and maintaining effective internal controls over financial reporting, and certainly implementing policies and procedures designed to safeguard assets, protect, detect, prevent, detect, correct errors, and so on. And really, you'll see our piece there in the middle as the external auditors is really to bring that fresh set of eyes, or the independence from an external point of view, reporting directly to this committee any items that come to our attention through the completion of our audit procedures. And certainly really do look for direction from this committee, certainly at the outset of our audit plan, i.e. here tonight, to the extent there is anything specific or anything unique you'd like us to incorporate into our plan. And then, of course, the committee itself, being those charged with governance, to really oversee the work of management and, quite candidly, oversee our work as well, to come together as part of the 3 legs of the stool that really does culminate into the financial reporting process. The next couple of slides really do speak to COVID-19. Hands down, COVID-19 has had a significant impact across every entity, including the city's business and financial reporting. So what we've tried to include on the next couple of slides is really an all-encompassing considerations, not necessarily specific or unique to the city of Kingston proper, but certainly things that we will incorporate or embed into our audit plan to make sure that we are covering off all of the areas as required. And you can see certainly first and foremost, not something that we typically speak of with respect to, significant doubt around going concern, but we all know that Treasury is a very important function in any given time, but in light of the pandemic, cash management has become key as well. So certainly some additional contemplations that we will give rise to the course of our audit and certainly address. You'll see on the second page with respect to the audit implications, certainly, understanding the impacts of the existing processes as the city moved to a virtual work environment, as an example, in certain cases, what the implications were to existing processes, procedures, and controls, and so on. And certainly, some of you will recall, we completed the balance of the 2019 year remotely, so that was something that was new and different, and we'll certainly propose to move forward with that as well in light of the second wave that we're certainly under. So things will look a little bit different with respect to COVID-19, but we certainly think it's important to have the discussion and welcome feedback in that regard as well. Moving into the next couple of slides, just a reminder, the financial statements for the city of Kingston
We have lost audio from Ms. Huber.
I can, to you, Mr. Chair, I can pick it up here.
Okay, Ms. Prophet, go ahead.
Yeah, so Ms. Seaver was just speaking to the group audit scope. So as a reminder, our audit looks at the consolidated financial statements for the city of Kingston. So we have identified 3 significant components within the group, which are outlined on page 7 of the report. So those being the city of Kingston standalone entity, as well as the utilities Kingston and Kingston Hydro components of the financial statements. So there are a number of other components to the consolidated financial statements. We do perform standalone component audits of those financial statements as well. The next slide walks through our professional requirements around audit risks. So for those committee members, these are not new. There is the fraud risk from revenue recognition, which we do rebut, giving the revenues are not deemed complex and there's no significant judgment in determining those. And the second around the management override of controls, this risk cannot be rebutted. So we do incorporate specific procedures to address this through our audit. And we will circle back on the results of those within our audit findings report. The next few slides walk through our detailed audit approach over the specific financial statement captions. The 2 items I would highlight, the first on page 9 over the employee future benefit obligations. We do perform substantive procedures that involve a reliance on management's experts, which is an actuary. So we do perform procedures to gain comfort over the competence of that actuary, the inputs that are sent to that actuary, and the rates used in determining that value at year end. And on the following page, on page 10, the one caption to speak to there would be around the payroll expenses. So as a reminder, we do test and evaluate the design and implementation and the operating effectiveness of the payroll related controls. So given the significance of this amount on the statement of operations, we do perform a test of controls as well as our substantive audit procedures. The next slide from our audit approach on page 11 around materiality. We have set materiality for the current year at $10 million. This is consistent with last year. And again, this is the quantum with which we feel would affect a user's decision-making on the financial statements as a whole. We do respond to aggregation risk and design our procedures at a much lower threshold. And we have included here certainly our audit misstatement posting thresholds of 500,000. So to the extent we identify differences above 500,000, we would be bringing those to management to request correction and communicating those to this committee. The next few slides walk through our audit quality, and really that's fundamental to our business here at KPMG, the objectivity, independence, and really the ethics and integrity with which we approach as external auditors. Part of audit quality is, of course, the team that's working through the audit file, and the team members are presented on page 14, and a similar team to the past years with Lori, myself, Stephanie Matherdy as audit manager, and Steve who is our digital champion for KPMG Canada and works with us on the IT systems and incorporating data and analytics in our audit approach. Our audit timeline is on page 15, similar to past years in terms of the timing of work. And as Ms. Kennedy spoke to earlier, we'll be starting our interim audit field work come November, and certainly planning to perform our procedures in a remote environment for this year. On page 16, just making the members of the committee here aware of a accounting standard change for the current year around estimates. So we do have new required procedures to gain comfort over significant estimates within the financial statement. So we will be working through those with management through the course of this year's audit. And the second item on this slide is an upcoming accounting standard change related to asset retirement obligations, which I'm sure you're all familiar with and saw the detailed appendices in our audit findings report, which was presented back in August. So certainly staying up to speed with management on the unfolding of that standard. The last part of the body of our audit planning report are our independence matters. So our proposed fees for the current year financial statement audit are presented there and in line with our proposal from the response to the RFP over the summer. And the last page, just a reminder about the additional audit related work that we do perform for the city with a number of other pieces of assurance work following the December 31st year end. The balance of our report are a number of appendices. There were a couple of items I did want to highlight there. Mr. Chair, on Appendix 1, our required communications, there are a number of items on that slide, and the one to really speak to are our required inquiries. So we do continue to meet with the chair of this committee annually and understand fraud risks and assessments throughout the year. Appendix 2 looks at technology in the audit. So we continue to be progressive in how we incorporate technology in our audit approach, our engagement management, risk assessment, and our audit quality and reporting. And really the value there, as we see through the following slides, including Appendix 3, is being able to analyze the complete populations and look at 100% of transactions within a group. And make our assessments on the population as a whole. Appendix 4, we look at lean in audit. So this is where we strive to add incremental value through our audit approach and deliver insights to management on specific business processes and the control environment. So we're looking to host an interactive workshop this year to walk through a specific financial process to enhance our team's understanding of that process and again, provide insights back to management on any improvements that could be made there. And the last appendix again is just our audit and assurance insights. So a number of resources there with the trends we're seeing across audit committees and in the sector more broadly. So in conclusion, that would highlight our audit plan for fiscal year 2020 and certainly welcome any questions from the committee members.
Thank you, Ms. Prophet and Ms. Huber. I see a question from Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, through your chair. Ms. Huber and Ms. Prophet, I have some questions with regards to city finances. There's a lot of discussion here about working back and forth with management, and we see you once a year, or the chair would see you once a year. And this is, you know, the city is a $400 million annual corporation. Do you feel that's sufficient amount of time to keep city councilors apprised of the financial issues and matters before the city? Or should we be having more regular meetings and having you perhaps have updates with us on a standing order for our policy admin meeting?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for the technical glitch I experienced a few moments ago. I can certainly see what we're seeing more broadly. So generally speaking, we would like to have ideally 2 interactions with the committee. First, to speak to the audit plan before we start executing our audit procedures, which is exactly what we're doing here tonight. And the second interaction would be at the completion of the financial statement audit to share our highlights with you. Certainly available to meet with you more frequently, but certainly what we're seeing across the sector is it's ordinary course, unless there's a unique reason to meet more frequently. Twice annually is sort of the standard.
So this tonight is an opportunity to discuss the budget plan or the audit plan. So is this also an opportunity to task you with additional inquiries? For example, you know, providing an audit on all, a listing and providing an audit on all consultants fees and consultants that were hired by the city over the last year. Would this be an opportunity for you to report back to us for that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we're always open to insights. If there's any particular areas you would like us to delve into, certainly we would be open to that here tonight, or certainly subsequent to this meeting as well. We could have a discussion. Certainly each and every year we are required under Canadian auditing standards to incorporate unpredictable procedures. in our audit that do not form part of our overall audit plan. And that's certainly something that we can incorporate this year with your input.
Okay. I have an additional question regarding that. Would it be outside the scope of this audit exercise to perhaps select one or maybe even two departments and have additional meetings with this committee to review perhaps a line by line item of a various agency that we fund or department like transportation, and allow us to go through and look at all the vehicles that have been purchased and have a greater granular look at an audit, because we don't have that opportunity when we go to budgets in November.
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of a financial statement audit, that would certainly be out of the scope of a main financial statement audit, because again, we are opining on the financial statements as a whole, and it sounds like that would be sort of a unique individual task with respect to a certain mandate. So perhaps I might ask Ms. Kennedy to perhaps provide any insight with respect to some of the plans that might be already underway at the city.
Thanks, Ms. Huber. So I can just add to that. So we are actually working to look at ways that we can bring further detail. So that's under discussion right now, and certainly we'll be working with some council members to bring something forward where we could do that. Certainly, if we want to look at departments and determine some additional information, that we can arrange that under a different thing. I'm not sure that would necessarily need to involve the auditors, because I don't know that we'd be actually auditing those transactions, but certainly in terms of providing the detail of those, that's something we could look at.
If I could just state as chair, so to maintain procedure, to the point, Councillor Chappelle, of our governance role and going into more detail on budget items before the budget is voted on, like the budgetary process, having more understanding of the way that the money is spent and that kind of thing, the governance role that we're in, both as council and as this committee. I think the point from staff, the point member from staff to deal with that would be the treasurer. So I think if any questions from councillors are that regarding detail that is or is not in any given report, it's always staff can always answer those questions, and I urge councillors to go to staff with those questions. But we need to be clear what the various things under our purview are, like what the scope of them is. So maybe Ms. Kennedy, you could just give us a brief reminder of where this particular item fits in the larger scope of governance on the city finances, and the way that we see it twice a year, and what our role is when this item is before us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this particular item is with respect, as you know, to the upcoming audit plan, and the auditors are required to report to a governing body. So in this case, the Administrative Policies Committee. There needs to be an opportunity for that committee to have these conversations with the auditors, particularly before the audit starts, in terms of planning and any concerns. And so that's certainly the report tonight. And then just to complete the process, as Ms. Huber said, they do come back in May, June, July, depending on the timing, to present the audit findings and any concerns they have. So there is the Administrative Policies Committee role is really in holding the auditors accountable in terms of their plan, and then in terms of coming back. And it also provides the auditors with the opportunity to speak to those that are responsible from a governance level in terms of anything that they feel that at a governance level the committee should be aware of. And so that's sort of the what's on tonight, and then of course what would be coming in the spring of next year.
Right. So in the specific example, Councillor Chappell wanting more detail in the way the city finances are spent, are these two steps in the audit process the appropriate way to ask those questions?
I would say getting into that detail is not at the audit level. Certainly the auditors are at a higher level in terms of what they look at. You saw the materiality tonight at $10 million. But there certainly is a process that we can look at to bring that detail back. I would say I would be the point person on that, and Councillor Chappell and I are going to be having a discussion on that. But there certainly is a process that we could put in place in terms of a vehicle where we could bring back additional information. I think my personal opinion on that in terms of the Administrative Policies Committee and where perhaps we're missing something is that as a governing committee, the members need to be comfortable that we have the right processes and controls in place. And to be quite frank, right now, I'm not sure we have the vehicle that we are really bringing that forth. It's informally, if somebody has a concern, they call me and we have a chat about it. But that's part of what we can look at in terms of the detail coming back, is rather than looking at 1,000 transactions, is as staff, we have a responsibility to make sure that our governing body is comfortable that we do have the right processes and the controls in place around those transactions. And so that's certainly something that we can look at in terms of what's the process for getting that level of comfort for the committee members.
I say these things, of course, members of the committee will probably already guess this, because this is becoming a recurring theme when the audit is before us, but really the time to reform the budget process is either at council in committee of the whole when we do the budget, or individually as councillors interacting with the treasurer and CFO and her office. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I think for the budget, that's another discussion that we can have to look at from I think what I've been talking about is more the actual activities and transactions. But absolutely from a budget standpoint, we can look at that process as well. And what is the information that council would like to have? And I am hearing the message that they would like more detail. So we can look at how do we present that detail without having, council having to spend hours upon hours, which is what I get to do in terms of combing through all the numbers. But we are definitely hearing the message. You would like more detail. So we will certainly look at how to do that. I can remind the committee we're already embarking on some change around budget engagement, which we've just launched. And so that's a piece of it too, is getting getting input from the community. And we're talking now about how do we take that input back, get that back to council members, so that you're getting a summary as well of what's coming, and that will feed into the budget. So I kind of looked at that as two separate processes, but it definitely is all related.
Thank you. And because this is an item, the external audit plan is what's before us, we should probably leave it there. I just want to say though that the last thing that you said about the process introduced to encourage engagement from members of the community on the budget process, while something that many councillors may support, is quite different than a councillor's role as part of the governing body in viewing the city finances and the city budget. It's not equivalent. It doesn't fulfill that role that Councillor Chappell is referring to. Just because we get more members of the public involved through engagement, like we're doing, and take away from that as a valid pursuit, but that doesn't actually satisfy the councillor's curiosity to have more detail in the budgetary process. So maybe that's the problem, is that we need a piece that will satisfy individual councillors' thirst for increased information. And I'll leave that with you, and I'll leave it there for my comments right now. Councillor Chappell, I'll allow you to speak as long as it's to the 2020 external audit plan.
Most certainly is. Thank you, Chair. My question is, I had a couple of questions this evening. One of them that seemed to fall within scope would be an audited account of all expenditures related to consultancies and consultancy fees paid over the course of the year. And I'm wondering if that's something that we can be added to this audit report.
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair, happy to incorporate that as part of our audit. Perhaps we will reach out to make sure that we know exactly what it is that you're looking for, but happy to incorporate that as well.
Yeah, if this is helpful, Ms. Huber, I believe it's just a category in the review to be able to know the proportion of the transactions that are external to that are for consultants fees as a separate category from other types of expenditures. I guess, is that correct, Councillor Chappell?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We will
Correct,
do that.
through you, your chair, that is correct. I just like an accounting of what fees we are spending to external parties, because I believe ultimately, if we don't have the capacity within the staffing, we should be looking at how we encourage or train staff. And it's just more of a longer term approach, and understanding where we're spending money on consultant fees would be helpful from a governance perspective.
Great. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Kiley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, through you. And also, I appreciate your reflections there about the potential missing piece. I think you're onto something. And I think that, as Ms. Kennedy said, Councillor Chappell and other councillors will look to address that shortly. So I'm glad to hear it. My question is about materiality. I believe it was page 11. My notes are right here in front of me, of the slides that were referenced. Two questions. One is, could we get a working definition? I know it's in there, but just having it explained, if anyone is watching this publicly or will refer to it, I think that'd be beneficial. And then I want to actually talk about the thresholds that are set at 2% and $500,000. So maybe an explanation first, please.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the concept of materiality is an important one. As you will see, it is very much referenced in our auditor's report. So the concept of materiality is meant to say what would change a user's decision on the financial statements. Would it be either qualitative or quantitative? So dollars, or maybe through the course of our audit work, we might have found items that were pervasive through the course of the organization that, although individually not significant, could be indicative of a bigger issue from a control perspective. So that's the pure definition of materiality. And then in terms of how it is calculated, so we are very much mandated by the CPA handbook in terms of how we calculate materiality. So there are 3 benchmarks for a municipality that we can look at, and you can see those noted at the top there. Typically, what we use for municipalities are the total expense line. We could use total revenues, or we could use accumulated surplus. And what the handbook does say is that for total expenses, we, in our professional judgment, based on our risk assessment, can determine where we lie within that range. And that range goes from 0.5% all the way to 3%. So where we typically land for municipalities, for municipal files, essentially across the country, based on our risk assessment, which tend to be low, as you've seen here tonight, there's certainly nothing specific or unique to the corporation's financial statements. So that's really where we've landed based on past experience as well. 2% is where we have landed for the last several years, and I wouldn't propose to go any higher, but I don't think there's any real indications to go lower. If in our view, as we are reviewing the detailed accounts, we do have the professional judgment to decrease in certain areas, but from an overall financial reporting materiality, 2% is sort of the norm.
Thank you. So how does that interact with what you referenced when you were speaking earlier of $500,000?
So the $500,000 is, through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize. The $500,000 is essentially a pure math exercise. So it is 5% of overall materiality. And again, it's a little bit of auditor speak, but that's basically our threshold to have a conversation with the team where we believe the ending result is different by $500,000 or greater. So we started accumulating any differences 500,000 or higher. Of course, if we thought that there was something lower that was indicative of a more qualitative aspect, we would highlight that as well. But that's certainly our starting point, to accumulate any differences to make sure that they are not going to exceed materiality, which would ultimately have an impact on our audit report. And we also do take into consideration the history of the quality of the books and records and the extent to which there may or may not have been adjustments. And certainly in our experience in recent years, there have been none of those through the course of our audits.
Okay, that is helpful. And just to be sure that I understand it then, the $500,000 would be aggregate across the whole corporation if you find certain discrepancies within what you're auditing, or that would be up to a $500,000 discrepancy in just the department or the area being looked at by you through the audit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great question. So I think the easiest way to look at it is an individual financial statement caption. So say, for example, within accounts receivable, if we thought there were uncollectible accounts of $1 million and management had only provided for 300,000, the difference of 700,000 in that individual account would accumulate to our tally sheet, if you will, at the end of the audit.
Yeah,
so we are required to keep it.
Sorry.
We're required to keep it that low so that we have the benefit of accumulating them as we go based on the individual financial statement captions.
Okay, thank you. And I think, just to be clear, I'm not questioning the treasurer or finance department in this. I just was wondering about the actual concept, because it struck me, and you've kind of corrected me in my assumption, it struck me as a bit high, but you're saying it could actually go up to 3%, which I find interesting, and probably will explore with Ms. Kennedy in the future. So thanks very much.
Great. Any other questions from members of the committee on the item? No? Okay. So let me pull this back up here. Thank you very much. We go to members of the public on this item. Comments or questions? Click the raise hand button or unmute if you can't find it. I don't see any hands. So we'll continue on. We need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Chappell, second by Councillor McLaren. So this is that the 2020 audit plan as presented by KPMG and attached as Exhibit A to report number AP 20-031 be received for information purposes. Before we vote, Mr. Clerk, can you explain this recommendation? Is this an information report? If not, why do we have a recommendation?
I will ask that Ms. Kennedy perhaps provide additional rationale regarding the importance of this matter being approved in a sort of unusual format.
Go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there is a requirement through the audit process that the committee accept this plan from the auditors. But that requirement is for the governing body that's overseeing the audit, which is why it doesn't go on to council. If that answers the question.
Thank you. So if I understand correctly, if we approve this recommendation, we have accepted the audit plan because the Administrative Policies Committee is the governing body for the audit plan. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So this is it. It doesn't go to council other than as a committee report. Does it even do that, Mr. Clerk?
No, it does not, Mr. Chair.
It does not. Okay. So this is it. The requirement by law is that the governing body, which in this case is this committee, approve the audit plan, the audit work starting. And that's what the recommendation is about. So it's moved and seconded, and now it is on the floor. Councillor Carley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just want to say that the fact that it doesn't go to council at all, actually, in my mind, furthers the point you were making, Councillor Stroud and Councillor Chappell, that there does need to be additional oversight in some respect. It just seems like a fairly significant thing to be undertaken as one item in a committee. when it has potential ramifications for the whole corporation. Again, not to cast doubt on the professional work that we see from staff time and again from finance. It does seem, in my mind, like we want a bit more direct and democratic oversight than just a simple report at one committee. So I'm just putting that out there in consideration to what's before us.
Thank you, Councillor Kiley. Before we engage in another discussion about general financial governance, I'll just repeat this recommendation is required by law from the governing body that oversees the audit plan, and that is Administrative Policies Committee, and it's us only. So before KPMG can start the work, we need to approve their plan, and that is the reason for the recommendation. For what Councillor Kiley was referencing, and for everything, many questions Councillor Chappelle has asked now and before, at this time of the auditors over the treasurer, when about more detail in the budgetary process and where the money's going and that kind of thing, that is separate to today's recommendation, and something that today's recommendation does not address. Is that clear to members of the committee? Okay. So any other comments? Yes, Councillor Spell, to the recommendation to accept this audit plan.
Yes, thank you, through your chair. I just want to confirm that what we're voting on does include the amendment that will have a detailed report on external costs broken down by who they are with regards to consultant fees and external price, like for example, assessment.
So that's a question to the clerk, Mr. Clerk. What is the status of the request by a member of the committee to the auditors to include that particular item of information in the audit? Or maybe
I would ask whether, sure, I was going to suggest that we ask the CFO whether she is comfortable undertaking this as staff directive, or would she like the recommendation amended to include the suggestion from Councillor Chappelle?
Okay, so Ms. Kennedy, do you need direction from the committee in the form of an amendment to have that information included, or can you just volunteer to do it without that extra step?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. No, I've taken that as staff directive, and we will work with Ms. Huber to incorporate that into the audit process, to look at those and to determine the best way to bring that back to the committee.
So as chair, I could insist on a motion so that the direction is clear, but I'm satisfied by the treasurer's response. As long as there's no further discussion from members of the committee on that front, I'm happy to take that as the final answer on that particular point. Are there any other members of the committee that wish to speak before we vote on the recommendation? Seeing none, I'll call the question to approve the recommendation that the audit plan as presented be received by the committee. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Huber and Ms. Prophet, and good luck. The last item is item E, sewage systems, under Part 8 of the OBC. There's a report from the Commissioner of Community Services. It's report 20-028. And there's a recommendation with 3 clauses, and I'll turn it over to the Commissioner to introduce this item.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'm joined this evening by our Chief Building Official, Lisa Kapner-Hunt. So we're bringing this report forward for the committee's benefit to understand where things are at with respect to a transition away from what the city has traditionally been doing the last number of years with respect to septic inspections and approvals that have been done by Kingston, Lennox and Addington Health Unit, and they've declared their intention to move away from providing this service, and a service that we would be bringing in-house into building services. So I'm going to let Ms. Kapner-Hunt provide some additional background on the report, and then we're happy to take questions from members of the committee or the public on the matter.
Thank you, Ms. Kapner-Hunt.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. In 1998, the city delegated its authority under the Ontario Building Code Act by entering into a sewage system agreement with Kingston Public Health to administer the provisions of sewage systems that are regulated under Part 8 of the Ontario Building Code. This delegated authority transfers the responsibility of issuing permits and inspecting construction of new septic systems to the public health inspectors. In January of this year, the city received notification from Kingston Public Health of their intent to terminate the agreement with the city effective January 1st, 2021. The reasoning for the termination was that the legislative authority for sewage systems is found in Part 8 of the code. At this time, Part 8 is the only section of the code that is not currently being delivered by the municipality. The city currently has 5 appointed inspectors qualified in sewage systems, and with the termination of the delegated authority agreement, the municipality is required to exercise their powers under the Act and Part 8 of the code with respect to enforcement of these sewage systems. It's recommended that the bylaw to enter into the agreement with public health for sewage systems be repealed, that the building bylaw be amended to remove the application of sewage systems for permits through public health and bring that back to the city of Kingston, and that the fees and charges bylaw be adopted to the current public health fee schedule, all 3 of these being effective January 1st, 2021.
Great, thank you, Ms. Capner-Hunt. So now we look to members of the committee to ask questions about the report. Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, through your chair. I'm looking at Schedule A, the 1998 fees and sewage systems. Are we looking at increasing these fees, or these are the fees that will be going forward? And if they are the fees going forward, is there like an automatic 2% increase over time, or are these going to be set? So I'm just understanding these fees. I know that there's limited number of areas within the city of Kingston that utilize septic field beds and what have you. But these certainly are impacted by our 2 councillors who are not on this call today, who are in with rural areas. And I'd just like to be able to understand this on their behalf.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So the Exhibit D is what the current public health schedule is that came into effect January 1st, 2018. So they're legislated the same way as we are to do to cost recover their fees. So it's a full cost recovery basis. So because the Building Services Department is not on the tax base, the fees that are recovered through septic systems would be the same as our current fee structure. So it covers the staff's time for the administration and enforcement of the Act.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, we go to members of the public. Are there any members of the public even still present? I see staff. I see the auditors.
There is 1 member of the public.
Okay, we'll wait and give them a chance to raise their hand or unmute. Okay, seeing no questions, we go to the committee for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. So McLaren, second by Councillor Chappelle, that the Administrative Policies Committee recommends to Council that bylaw number 98-88, bylaw to authorize entering into an agreement with the Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington Health Unit for the provision of septic systems approval be repealed as per Exhibit F. Draft bylaw to repeal bylaw number 98-8, to report number AP 20-028, and that bylaw number 2005-99, a bylaw to provide for the construction, demolition, change of use, and transfer of permits and inspections, be amended to remove the requirement to make application to the KFLNA Public Health for sewage permits as per Exhibit E, draft bylaw to amend building bylaw number 2005-99 to report number AP 20-028. And that the proposed fee changes be implemented through the annual fees and charges bylaw update. That's the recommendation. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Kelly.
Actually, I'm just going to pick up briefly on what Councillor Chappelle asked, because I think it was implied, but I just want to be clear that because it's cost recovery, if there are any additional equipments needed by the staff who are following the code in this line of work, that would be recovered as well. I guess what I'm wondering is, does public health have any infrastructure that the city doesn't currently, that we'll have to accrue cost for to pick this up?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. So currently we're in discussions with public health in terms of the equipment that they have. So any equipment that's in good shape, they will be passing over to the inspectors here. At this time, we're not anticipating having to purchase any equipment, but if we do, it will be covered by the reserve funds under building services.
Okay, so that's actually good to know. So it wouldn't be covered from the fees. It'd come out of another fund.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments or discussion from the committee? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Back to the agenda. We're almost there, guys. So that's it for business. So remember that F, G, and H were withdrawn. Any motions, Mr. Clerk?
No, there are not, Mr. Chair.
And I see there's no notices of motion. We're now at other business. Any members of the committee bring up other business? Seeing none. Correspondence. There were 2 items of correspondence on the addendum. Letters from residents. And Mr. Clerk, those letters, I think, referenced the items that were withdrawn, if I recall.
Correct.
Items be attached to the agenda. What happens to all the correspondence we've received on the withdrawn items?
Well, if a supplemental report is coming forward from staff, which I assume will be, these items can be included in the report as an exhibit, which normally happens with the planning reports, or if that is not the case, we can deal with them as part of the next agenda when this comes forward, but I would imagine that they'll get picked up in the staff report.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, I leave that in your capable hands to make sure that the relevant public comments stay with the, sorry about that, for when the supplemental report comes back. So that's fine. That's the correspondence. We're back to the agenda. That was correspondence. And we have next meeting. Okay, so this is the last item for adjournment, and it says in the package December 10th. I would like to ask Commissioner of Community Services, Ms. Agnew, could you tell us if the withdrawn items will be on our next meeting, or what is the thoughts around the timing of the withdrawn reports?
Thank you, and through you. So certainly the next meeting, as we understand from the established schedule through council, is in December. It would be my hope that with the committee's consent and the support of the chair, that we could look at bringing this back potentially at the end of November by way of a special meeting, just to be able to deal with this item independently. Obviously, there has been a long history associated with this work. And because also there are multiple reports associated with the deferral, it does get a little bit complicated in trying to facilitate the conversation. So thinking an independent meeting just to deal with this as an agenda item might be helpful for the facilitation of the discussion, and that we're confident we should be able to do that by the end of November at the committee's consent to that. If not, we can proceed to the regular scheduled meeting in December would be the timeline that I'm working to.
Okay, so as chair then, I would suggest that we have a short discussion right now about our next meeting and about these items. So it is the intention of staff to bring these reports back to our next meeting. The question is, when is our next meeting going to be? There are two suggestions from staff. One would be last week of November, which I'm looking at my calendar. So the last week of November was the week that our 3 budget meetings were set for November 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Mr. Clerk, I understand that because of the pandemic, the budget meetings have been pushed back. Is that correct?
It's my understanding, Mr. Chair, that the meetings have been rescheduled to January. I'm not aware of the specific dates offhand, but I'm fairly confident that the November dates are free.
So that being the case, I know I have a very congested schedule, but I did have November 25th blocked off for the final budget meeting and vote. So that's Wednesday, November 25th. This committee normally meets on Thursday. That's another option, Thursday, November 26th. Does anyone in the committee have suggestion of between, I guess now 3 options, the 25th, 26th of November, or just as scheduled tacked on to our regular agenda on December 10th, which would be two weeks later, 2 weeks after November 26th. So it's a 15-day difference between November 25th and December 10th. Councillor Schwab.
Through your chair, Ms. Agnew, would 2 weeks be sufficient time to afford an opportunity to have meaningful conversations with these small STR hosts?
Thank you, and through you. So the nature of staff's withdrawal of the report from this evening's agenda wasn't connected at all with further consultation needs related to the STR hosts. We've had a number of conversations with them over the last period of time, and the conversations continued since the last time. This was before the committee in February, through formal meetings in March, and some additional Zoom meetings with members of the association over the subsequent months leading up to the evening meeting today. It was really more related to some administrative pieces in the background associated with the MAT collection that I wanted an opportunity to just work through some further details. So that's really the nature of the additional work related to the reason that staff had requested this report be withdrawn from consideration, so I could bring that forward with all of the details covered off. There's some new information that came to light later today that I previously didn't know about, and I wanted an opportunity just to make sure I fully worked through those details so that I could present the committee with all the information available to help them make the most informed decision.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Agnew. So so staff requires more time before this item is considered, but am I correct, Ms. Agnew, that you prefer a late November date, but could comply with the December 10th date if we can't find quorum on a November date? Is that correct?
Yes, and through you, Chair, that's correct. Certainly because what staff is recommending at this point for the committee's consideration on timing of the enactment of the bylaw, we'd suggested that not be in effect till June of 2021. So if the committee's not able to look at establishing a meeting in the month of November and we proceed to the next scheduled meeting in December, that would be fine from a timing perspective. I was just thinking about the complexity of this item and the ability for the committee to deal with this independent of other pieces, since there are multiple reports associated with this item and likely some delegations, but we're happy to work at the committee's direction on that.
Okay. So having heard that, I would submit, well, first of all, it's the committee's decision when we meet, and that's why we're having this discussion. Second of all, the salient point seems to be whether we have it on a possibly congested agenda on December 10th with the other items? As we saw today, there was 5 other items. Or do we make a meeting where we know it's the items that were withdrawn were the only items on a separate day? So really it's at the pleasure of the committee. Do we meet twice, 2 separate shorter meetings, or 1 longer meeting? That's what's on the floor, and I'm willing to follow the committee's direction. Does anyone have a preference? If no one has a preference, I will make a suggestion. Okay, no one has a preference. Well, I simply, because all things being equal, we went to bi-monthly meetings with this committee because it was agreed at that time, and this is the last term, Mr. Schell, that we preferred to have bi-monthly longer meetings than monthly short meetings, just because of the time involved getting down to City Hall and everything for committee meetings every month. That applies to this situation. I am available on December 10th, and I have it reserved for administrative policies. I also had Wednesday, November 25th reserved for budget, so that happens to be open for me. But if there's no timing reason to do it, then I would suggest that we just leave it for December 10th. Unless new information comes to light that the clerk tells me that December 10th is going to be a 5 to 6 hour meeting or something like that. Councillor Schell.
Yes, through your chair. I'm just looking at the fact that the composition of our committee is down, by 2 members at the moment. And I know Councillor Bohm is often very troubled with being able to commit to a meeting, and tonight is no exemption of that. Perhaps we should stick with the administrative policy schedule and then work collaboratively with the clerk to perhaps ensure that we have a lighter subject matter, in addition to dealing with I guess our traditional responsibilities.
Okay, so before we decide, Mr. Clerk, if with following standard procedure, when you're the one that puts together the agenda, would this item or items be the beginning of the agenda on December 10th, if that's where we go, the way that we go?
We can certainly put this matter at the front of the agenda. I would caution the committee that the December meeting is normally fulsome, as there are several reports typically scheduled. There would probably be a lengthy meeting. I can check the specific details. If the committee is uncomfortable with making a decision tonight regarding the meeting date, we can leave December 10th as scheduled. And if the chair wishes to call a special meeting in the future, he can reach out to me and I can pull the committee and we can include Ms. Agnew in that discussion as well. It seems that there are a lot of moving parts tonight and it may not be possible to make a decision.
And we're only 2/3 full at the moment. So I would say that as chair, we will not schedule that extra meeting right now, but I am open to the idea. So if 3 members of the committee contact me and say they prefer another date, and we can confirm quorum on that date by email, we will. That option remains open. But in the absence of that, our next meeting would be, as stated in the agenda, December 10th, 2020. That is end of quarter and end of year. So as the clerk said, it may turn into a longer meeting, but with that in mind, think about it, and please don't hesitate. If you prefer to have it separated, let me know. And if the majority of the committee are inclined to do it that way, that's the way we'll do it. Sound good? Okay, so our next meeting is December 10th, and I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. By Councillor Spell, seconded by Councillor McLaren. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you very much for your patience tonight, and thank you to all staff who stay to the end, and we'll see you next time. This meeting is adjourned.